Hey guys, tonight we are stepping back into a world that the history books usually scrub clean with a very stiff, very judgmental brush. Picture this. The year is 1348. The sun has dipped below the muddy horizon of a flickering European village, and you are standing in a room that smells intensely of wood smoke, damp wool, and the unmistakable, slightly sour tang of tallow candles made from sheep fat. There are no dimmable LED strips here, no silk sheets, and absolutely no scented lavender sprays to set the mood. Instead, you are looking at a space where romance, privacy, and basic hygiene are about to take on a whole new meaning. Honestly, looking around this cramped, shadow drenched room, you probably wouldn't survive a single weekend here without crying for a hot shower and a canister of disinfectant. But before you get comfortable under your modern clean blankets, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, I love reading where you are listening from, so leave a comment with your local time and city below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As you step further into this twilight world, your boots crunch lightly on the rushes strewn across the dirt floor. These aren't just for decoration. They are mixed with dried herbs like chamomile and mint to mask the less than pleasant odors of medieval daily life. You pull your heavy cloak tighter around your shoulders because the chill in these stone or timber houses doesn't care that it's bedtime. In the medieval mind, the night wasn't just a time for sleep. It was a vast, mysterious canvas where the physical world and the spiritual world blurred together. The darkness outside is absolute, a thick, velvety blackness that modern humans rarely experience. There are no streetlights filtering through your window, only the distant, occasional howl of a wolf or the rhythmic clinking of the village watchman's keys. You look toward the corner of the room where the bed sits, if you can even call it that. For the vast majority of people in the Middle Ages, a bed is a large wooden box tight with straw, or, if you are slightly wealthier, stuffed with coarse animal hair that rustles every time you shift your weight. You watch a flicker of candlelight dance across the rough linen sheets. This is where the intimate life of the medieval couple unfolds. Modern media loves to portray this era as either incredibly puritanical and repressed, or wildly chaotic and unwashed. But the reality is far more human, far stranger, and honestly a bit cozy in its own bizarre way. To understand what intimacy was really like, you first have to understand how people viewed their own bodies. There were no anatomy textbooks on the nightstand. Instead, people relied on a complex mix of ancient Greek science and folklore. You might think they were completely oblivious to how things worked, but they actually believed that intimacy was a vital part of health. However, their reasons were a little different than ours. They believed the human body was governed by four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, and that an excess of any fluid could make you violently ill or textbook irritable. Historians still debate exactly how literally the average peasant took these medical texts, but the general consensus was that a healthy romantic life kept your internal humors balanced, preventing your brain from overheating. Imagine trying to relax with that kind of medical pressure hanging over your head. You crawl onto the rustling straw mattress, the linen scratching slightly against your skin. There is an open hearth in the center of the room, and the dying embers cast a soft orange glow across the wooden beams of the ceiling. You realize that in this era, being alone is a luxury that almost no one possesses. The idea of a private bedroom where you can lock the door and leave the rest of the world behind is a concept that won't be widely invented for centuries. Right now, you are sharing this space. Perhaps your children are sleeping at the foot of the bed, or your cousin is snoring softly on a pile of blankets near the fire. Yet life went on. Humans have always been incredibly adaptable, and the medieval peasant developed a remarkable ability to simply ignore the people sleeping 3 feet away. Intimacy wasn't loud or performative. It was a quiet, hushed affair carried out in the deepest shadows of the night. You lie there, listening to the rhythmic breathing of the household, realizing that the soft murmurs exchanged between partners back then were perhaps the only true moments of privacy they ever had. An unusual fact that often gets left out of the grand narratives of kings and castles is that medieval society actually placed a massive emphasis on a woman's satisfaction. While the church had its own rigid opinions, which we will certainly get into later, the prevailing medical theory of the time, inherited from thinkers like Galen, stated that for a child to be conceived, both partners had to fully participate and enjoy the experience. If one partner remained cold and unfulfilled, the balance was ruined and nature would refuse to take its course. So, in a strange twist of historical irony, the lack of modern scientific tools forced medieval society to view intimacy as a deeply mutual necessity rather than a one sided chore. You watch a spider spin a web in the corner of the rafter above you, illuminated by the last gasps of the candle. The wax is pooling at the base of the iron holder, giving off that thick, heavy scent of animal fat that you are slowly getting used to. It's funny to think how much effort we put into creating the perfect atmosphere today. The right lighting, the perfect playlist, the exact temperature on the thermostat. In the 14th century, your only atmosphere was the crackle of oak logs, the rustle of a straw mattress, and the hope that the fleas wouldn't decide to join in on the conversation. As your eyes adjust to the deep gloom, you notice a small wooden crucifix hanging on the wall right above the headboard. It serves as a constant, silent reminder that even in the most private moments of your life, the medieval universe was watching. Every action, every thought, and every whisper was weighed against an intricate cosmic scale of right and wrong. It created a fascinating psychological tension. On one hand, you had the natural human drive for connection and comfort in a harsh, cold world. On the other, you had a society deeply preoccupied with the fate of your eternal soul. But as you close your eyes and listen to the gentle, steady patter of a midnight rain beginning to fall on the thatched roof outside, the anxieties of the era seem to soften. The medieval world was brutal, yes, but it was also slow. There were no emails waiting for you in the morning, no late-night news alerts to spike your cortisol, and no social media feeds to compare your life to. There was just the room, the warmth of another human being in a cold stone world, and the long, dark hours of the night stretching out before you like an undiscovered country. You pull the heavy woolen blanket up to your chin, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down, and prepare yourself for the unique rhythm of the medieval night. As the midnight rain continues to drum a soft, hypnotic rhythm against the thatched roof, you find yourself drifting into a state of awareness that feels entirely foreign to your modern brain. In the 21st century, you are used to a solid, uninterrupted 8-hour block of sleep, or at least that is what you aim for. But here in the medieval night, the darkness is far too long and far too deep to absorb all at once. You feel your eyes flutter open somewhere around 2 in the morning. The fire has died down to a dull, pulsing crimson eye in the center of the room, throwing long, lazy shadows across the wooden rafters. You aren't tossing and turning with insomnia. Instead, you feel completely rested, clear-headed, and strangely peaceful. This is the phenomenon of the two-phase sleep cycle, a historical reality that shifted only when artificial lighting altered human biology centuries later. Historians still debate exactly how universal this practice was across different social classes, but extensive records show that for generations the human night was split into two distinct chapters. Your first sleep started shortly after dusk, a heavy, restorative slumber that cleared the exhaustion of a long day of manual labor. Now, in this quiet interlude between the first and second sleep, the world enters a magical, hushed period known simply as the watch. You prop yourself up on your elbow, the straw mattress rustling like dry autumn leaves beneath you. The house is completely still, yet it is a living, breathing stillness. Next to you, your partner stirs, also waking up naturally without the harsh jolt of an alarm clock. This wakeful window, lasting anywhere from 1 to 2 hours, is the true heart of medieval intimacy. With the chores of the farm done and the chaotic demands of the daytime village silenced, this is the only time couples have entirely to themselves. There are no smartphones to tempt your attention, no late-night television shows to scroll through. There is only the dim, amber glow of the embers and the soft warmth of another person. During this midnight gap, people did many things. Some would rise quietly to tend the hearth, checking that the precious coals wouldn't die out before dawn. Others might use the quiet hours to pray, believing that the veil between heaven and earth was thinnest when the rest of the world was asleep. But for most couples, it was a time for deep, whispered conversations, the sharing of secrets, and tender physical closeness. Because their bodies were fully rested from the first phase of sleep, they brought a relaxed, unhurried energy to these moments. It was an intimacy completely detached from the frantic pace of modern life, structured entirely around the natural, unforced rhythms of their own biology. An unusual fact about this midnight interval is that medieval medical folklore actually considered it the absolute prime time for romance. It was widely believed by local healers and village elders that the food from supper had been properly digested during the first sleep, meaning the body's internal energies were perfectly balanced for connection. If you tried to initiate romance right after a heavy meal of rye bread and pottage, you risked disrupting your humors and producing a very grumpy, ill-tempered child. Therefore, the second watch was treated with a sort of casual reverence, a built-in nightly sanctuary for affection. You look around the dim room, noticing how the absence of bright light forces your other senses to sharpen. You can hear the gentle rustle of a mouse in the floor rushes, the distant, muffled lowing of a cow in the adjoining lean-to stable, and the soft, steady breathing of your partner. In this darkness, the lack of privacy we complained about earlier suddenly becomes less of a burden. When the world is this dark, a heavy wool curtain hung around a box bed acts as an impenetrable wall. You are trapped in your own little universe, a warm island of linen and wool surrounded by a sea of cold, midnight air. It is amusing to think how modern tech companies try to sell us apps and wearable rings to optimize our sleep cycles, tracking our REM stages and telling us when to wind down. The medieval peasant achieved perfect sleep hygiene simply by obeying the setting sun. They didn't need a meditation track to soothe their anxieties. The absolute silence of the countryside did it for them. As you lie there, talking in low, rhythmic murmurs that barely carry past the edge of the mattress, you realize that this two-phase sleep allowed for emotional connection that we rarely make time for today. It wasn't about squeezing romance into a tiny window before passing out from exhaustion. It was an integrated, peaceful part of the night's journey. Gradually, a familiar, heavy warmth begins to creep back into your limbs. The midnight watch is drawing to a close, and your body is signaling that it is time for the second sleep, the deep, dream-filled slumber that will carry you through to the first light of dawn. You pull the heavy coverlet back over your shoulders, tucking it tightly against the draft that sneaks through the cracks in the wooden shutters. The embers in the hearth give one last, faint pop, dropping into a bed of gray ash. You close your eyes, letting yourself sink back down into the rustling straw, perfectly aligned with a timeless human rhythm that the modern world has all but forgotten. Just as you are settling into that deep, restorative second sleep, a cold draft of reality breezes through the cracks of your wooden shutters. In the medieval world, you see, your bedroom isn't just occupied by you, your partner, and the occasional mouse rustling in the floor rushes. Hovering invisibly at the foot of your bed is the massive, omnipresent weight of the medieval church. You roll over on your coarse linen pillow, perhaps catching a glimpse of that wooden crucifix hanging above the headboard. And you are reminded that your private life is governed by a set of rules so dizzyingly complex, it would make a modern tax code look like a children's bedtime story. If you think modern relationships involve a lot of overthinking, you wouldn't survive an hour under the watchful eye of a 14th century bishop. The church possessed an almost obsessive interest in the mechanics of human affection, documenting every imaginable scenario in massive volumes known as penitential books. These were essentially spiritual rulebooks used by local priests during confession to determine exactly how many days of fasting on bread and water you owed for stepping out of line. Historians still debate whether the average peasant actually confessed to every single minor infraction, or if local priests simply turned a blind eye to keep the peace in their parishes. However, the official laws were written down in stark, unyielding ink, creating a cosmic calendar of restrictions that dictated exactly when you could and could not be close to your spouse. Yes. Let's look at the calendar because planning a romantic evening in the Middle Ages required the scheduling skills of a high level corporate executive. First, you had to cross off every single Sunday because Sunday was the Lord's Day. Then came Thursday, which was consecrated to the memory of Christ's arrest, and Friday, the day of the crucifixion. Saturday wasn't safe either, as it was dedicated to the Virgin Mary. So before you even factor in the changing seasons, 4 days out of every week are already completely off limits. But wait, it gets much more restrictive. You also have to calculate the great liturgical seasons of the year. There is Lent, the 40 days of fasting before Easter, where absolute abstinence was expected. Then there is Advent, the weeks leading up to Christmas, and Whitsuntide, the period around Pentecost. Add in various major and minor saints' days, planting festivals, harvest weeks, and specific periods of fasting, and some medieval scholars calculate that there were less than 40 days a year where a married couple could legally enjoy each other's company without committing a minor sin. It is a wonder the population managed to survive at all when the calendar was working so thoroughly against them. An unusual fact that highlights the bizarrely detailed nature of these rules is that the church even regulated the specific physical positions couples could use. Anything that strayed from what was deemed strictly natural, according to ancient theological interpretations, was strictly forbidden. If a couple decided to get a little too creative on their rustling straw mattress, they could find themselves facing a penance of up to 3 years of fasting and prayer. The underlying philosophy was that intimacy was created by the divine strictly for the continuation of the human race. To find too much earthly pleasure in it was viewed as a dangerous distraction from the salvation of your soul. You lie there in the quiet dark, listening to the wind howl through the eaves of the house, imagining the sheer mental gymnastics a medieval couple had to perform. You want to show affection to your partner, but your brain is frantically flipping through a mental calendar. Is it a feast day? Is it a fast day? Did the local priest mention a special vigil during Sunday Mass? It turns out that the most rebellious thing a medieval husband and wife could do was simply hold hands on a Wednesday night during Lent. It is amusing to contrast this level of institutional micromanagement with our modern world, where we complain if our streaming service buffers for more than 5 seconds, or if our fitness tracker tells us we didn't meet our daily movement goal. The medieval peasant had to navigate a universe where an unauthorized whisper in the dark could theoretically add a few decades to their time in purgatory. Yet, despite these terrifying spiritual stakes, human nature remained remarkably resilient. Court records from the era are filled with cases of ordinary people making cheeky excuses, pleading ignorance, or simply accepting that they would have to do a little extra fasting in exchange for a few moments of earthly comfort. As you look at the dim outline of the room, you realize that this constant tension between the sacred and the flesh created a very specific kind of psychological atmosphere. It made the moments of allowed intimacy feel incredibly precious, almost like a rare treasure snatched from the jaws of a strict bureaucracy. There was no room for taking things for granted. Every touch, every shared warmth in the bitter cold of winter was a calculated choice made against the backdrop of eternity. Gradually, the sheer absurdity of the theological math fades into the background, and the comforting rhythmic breathing of your partner pulls you back to the present moment. The church might control the calendar, the priests might write the massive penitential books, and the church bells down the road might ring out the hours of prayer. But right now, inside the heavy wool curtains of your bed, the world is reduced to just two people trying to keep each other warm. You close your eyes, letting the complex laws of the medieval universe dissolve into the shadows, and allow yourself to sink back into the quiet, simple peace of the night. The rain has stopped, leaving a heavy, damp silence hanging over your small timber cottage, but the chill inside the room remains. To cope with this eternal dampness, you don't just dive into bed wearing modern silk or synthetic pajamas. Instead, you have to dress according to the strict dictates of 14th century bedroom fashion. You reach over to the wooden chest at the side of your bed and pull out a tunic-like garment made of heavy, unbleached linen. This is your chemise or smock, and in the medieval world, it serves as the ultimate barrier between your skin, the scratching straw mattress, and the judgmental eyes of society. Modern movies love to depict medieval lovers slipping between velvet sheets completely unclad, showcasing a cinematic romance that is, frankly, historically ridiculous. In reality, unless you were exceptionally wealthy or living in an unusually warm climate, going to sleep completely bare was considered both an invitation to a severe chest cold and a sign of utter lawlessness. The linen camise you are slipping over your head is long, reaching down past your knees with thick sleeves that bunch up around your elbows. It feels stiff at first, a bit rough against your skin, but as your body heat warms the fibers, it softens into a surprisingly comforting layer. This garment wasn't just for keeping warm. It was an essential tool for maintaining modesty, a concept that the medieval mind defined very differently than we do today. Even within the supposedly private confines of a marriage bed, total exposure was viewed with deep suspicion. The church, which as you know is always hovering metaphorically near the headboard, taught that the human body was a fragile vessel prone to temptation. Therefore, many couples engaged in their nightly affection while remaining largely clothed in these long linen smocks. Historians still debate exactly how strictly the average person adhered to this bedroom dress code, with some records suggesting that rural peasants were far more relaxed about nudity than the anxious urban middle class. Yet, the prevailing cultural norm was to keep a layer of fabric between yourself and the world, even in your most intimate hours. To add to this unique aesthetic, you don't leave your head bare either. You reach for a linen nightcap, tying the fabric straps securely beneath your chin. To a modern observer, you would look less like a romantic figure and more like a bundle of laundry tied up with string. But this cap serves a vital medical purpose, according to medieval science. It was universally believed that the cold night air carried dangerous vapors, or miasmas, that could enter through your ears and nose while you slept, causing everything from a mild fever to total madness. By wrapping your head in linen, you are effectively sealing your brain against the perilous midnight drafts. An unusual fact that highlights the strange intersection of fashion and medieval intimacy is the existence of the chemise de la mariée, or a specialized marital smock that featured strategically placed openings or reinforced slits. This allowed couples to fulfill their biological and religious duties toward continuation while minimizing actual skin-to-skin contact, thereby satisfying the strict theological demands for absolute purity and restraint. Imagine navigating a romantic encounter through what was essentially a heavily engineered linen tent. It turns out that medieval fashion wasn't designed to accentuate appeal. It was designed to survive the winter and placate your confessor. You shift against the coarse linen sheets, listening to the fabric rustle against the straw beneath you. There is a strange, quiet dignity to this heavy clothing. It forces you to move slowly, deliberately. In a world where you are constantly exposed to the elements, to hard labor, and to the communal gaze of your neighbors, wrapping yourself in multiple layers of clean linen feels like a form of protection. It creates a small private boundary around your physical self. It is amusing to think about how much money people spend today on luxury loungewear, moisture-wicking bamboo fabrics, and perfectly tailored sleep masks, all in an effort to biohack a better night's rest. The medieval peasant achieved a profound sense of security simply by tying a linen rag under their chin and wrapping themselves in a rough wool blanket. They didn't worry about whether their clothes matched or if their sleepwear was flattering. Their only goal was to keep the damp air out of their lungs and the fleas off their skin. As you lie next to your partner, both of you cocooned in your respective layers of heavy linen, the initial awkwardness of the garments begins to fade. The fabric traps your collective warmth, creating a microclimate of comfort inside the dark, drafty room. You can hear the steady, rhythmic puffing of your partner's breath through the linen of their cap, a soft sound that anchors you to the reality of the present moment. The fashion might be bulky, the rules might be restrictive, and the look might be completely devoid of modern glamour, but beneath the layers of linen and wool, the simple human need for warmth and connection remains entirely unchanged. You close your eyes, letting the heavy folds of the smock settle around you, and allow yourself to sink deeper into the quiet, protected dark of the medieval night. As you adjust the heavy linen of your nightcap and try to find a comfortable spot on your rustling straw mattress, you quickly realize that the concept of a solitary sanctuary is a modern luxury you took entirely for granted. In the medieval world, the phrase alone time doesn't really exist. You shift your weight only to accidentally elbow your youngest child, who is curled up horizontally at the foot of the bed, while your older brother snores softly just a few inches to your left. To make things even more crowded, the farmhands who helped harvest the rye this afternoon are sleeping on bundles of wool right across the floor, their rhythmic breathing filling the small timber room. Modern media loves to show medieval couples sharing deep, whispery secrets in vast, empty chambers, but the historical reality was much more crowded. For the average person, the bed was the most expensive piece of furniture in the house, which meant you didn't just buy one for every member of the family. You bought one large wooden box frame, uh, packed it with as much straw or feather as you could afford, and everyone piled in together to share body heat and save space. Historians still debate exactly how couples managed to find any semblance of romance under such crowded conditions, but court records suggest that people simply developed an incredible, almost supernatural ability to block out their surroundings, treating their immediate space within the blankets as an invisible private room. This communal sleeping arrangement wasn't just limited to the peasant classes either. It extended all the way up to the wealthy nobility. If you were a traveling merchant or a minor lord staying at a local wayside inn, you didn't get your own private suite. You paid for a spot in a massive communal bed that could hold up to half a dozen complete strangers. You could easily find yourself falling asleep next to a wandering friar on one side and a muddy blacksmith on the other. In fact, a famous English inn from the late Middle Ages featured the Great Bed of Ware, a legendary piece of furniture that could famously cushion over 15 people at the exact same time. An unusual fact that highlights just how casual people were about this lack of privacy is that medieval etiquette books actually contained specific rules on how to behave when sharing a mattress with a stranger. Travelers were strictly advised not to roll around too violently, to keep their feet to their own side, and to avoid scratching themselves if they were suffering from the common medieval plague of bedbugs. Furthermore, it was considered incredibly rude to initiate any form of private affection with your partner if a guest was sharing the frame, out of respect for their comfort. Imagine having to politely ask a wandering merchant to cover his ears because you wanted to whisper a sweet nothing to your spouse. You lie perfectly still in the dim amber glow of the dying hearth, listening to the symphony of snores around you. There is a strange, overwhelming sense of security in this crowded darkness. In a world fraught with sudden fires, late-night wolf raids, and political unrest, being surrounded by the physical presence of your family and community provided a deep psychological comfort. You weren't an isolated individual facing the terrifying, unknown night alone. You were part of a pack, a collective human shield against the cold and the dark. It is amusing to think about how modern homeowners stress over having enough guest bedrooms, proper soundproofing, and the exact thread count of their sheets to ensure their visitors feel isolated and pampered. The medieval host simply pointed to a pile of straw next to the family dog and called it a luxury accommodation. They didn't view a crowded room as an invasion of privacy. They viewed it as a successful, lively household full of warmth and life. Gradually, your ears adapt to the ambient sounds of the crowded room. The soft sigh of a child dreaming, the rustle of the floor rushes as someone shifts, the distant thump of a horse stamping its hoof in the attached stable. The boundaries of your world shrink down to the tiny space between your shoulder and your partner's arm. You realize that true intimacy in this era wasn't about finding an empty room. It was about finding an emotional closeness right in the middle of a crowd. You close your eyes, letting the collective warmth of the household wrap around you like a heavy, protective cloak, and allow yourself to drift back down into the slow, rhythmic peace of the shared medieval night. The crowded room hums with the steady rhythm of collective breathing, But let's say you and your partner are looking for something to spark a little extra warmth on these freezing winter nights, something to ensure that affection thrives despite the strict calendar of the church and the snoring relatives at the foot of your bed. In the 14th century, you wouldn't head down to a local pharmacy or look up lifestyle tips online. Instead, you would secretly consult the village cunning woman or flip through a stained, hand copied herbal manuscript to find a recipe for a medieval love potion. Modern romance relies on candlelit dinners and smooth music, but medieval passion was often driven by an absolute, unwavering belief in the magical properties of the natural world. If a relationship was cooling down, or if a young peasant wanted to catch the eye of a weaver across the village square, they turned to a fascinating underground market of charms, talismans, and bizarre culinary concoctions. Historians still debate exactly how much the local authorities tolerated these practices, as the church officially viewed love magic as a dangerous form of witchcraft. However, records from secular courtrooms reveal that ordinary people, from desperate milkmaids to anxious dukes, were completely obsessed with using nature to manipulate human desire. The recipes for these medieval love potions were not for the faint of heart, though they were always deeply rooted in the era's understanding of biology. You might be instructed to gather wild vervain, coriander seeds, and a handful of periwinkle leaves under the light of a waxing moon. These herbs would be crushed into a fine powder and slipped into a goblet of spiced ale or a bowl of mutton pottage. The goal wasn't just to cast a psychological spell. According to medieval science, these specific plants possessed hot and moist properties that would physically heat up a person's cold humors, forcing their heart to melt with affection toward whoever served the meal. An unusual fact that showcases the truly bizarre depths of medieval folklore is the widespread belief in the romantic power of ordinary baked goods. In many European villages, a popular folk recipe required a young woman to knead dough for a loaf of rye bread directly against her own skin, allowing her natural perspiration to infuse the flour before baking it in the communal oven. This loaf was then fed to the object of her affection. The theory was that her physical essence would enter his body, creating an unbreakable chemical bond of devotion. It gives a whole new, slightly unsettling meaning to the concept of home-cooked comfort food. You lie in the dark, watching the faint reflection of the stars through the grease-soaked parchment that serves as your window pane, imagining the sheer desperation that drove people to these lengths. If your marriage was rocky, you didn't have relationship counselors or self-help podcasts to guide you through the rough patches. You had to rely on a bundle of dried roots tucked beneath your mattress, or a secret prayer whispered over a cup of honeyed wine. It created an environment where love wasn't just an emotion. It was an active, almost physical force that you could brew, bake, or carry in your pocket. It is amusing to compare these medieval love remedies with our modern obsession with dating apps, relationship algorithms, and pheromone-infused colognes designed to mathematically guarantee attraction. The medieval peasant simply handed someone a piece of strange bread or a cup of herbal tea and let nature do the heavy lifting. They didn't worry about mixed signals or text message etiquette. They trusted that a well-timed sprig of mint could solve their romantic anxieties in a single evening. Gradually, the strange mental images of modern dating and ancient witchcraft fade away, replaced by the comforting, simple reality of the dark room. You don't need a magical powder or a secret charm tonight. The simple, unforced closeness of another human being in this vast, quiet night is enough to keep the cold world at bay. You shift slightly against the linen-covered straw, letting the wild folklore of the era drift out of your mind, and allow yourself to sink back into the deep, unhurried peace of the medieval night. As you lie perfectly still, watching the soft shadows stretch across the rough-hewn wooden ceiling, your mind drifts back to the curious ways people tried to understand the inner workings of their own bodies. Remember when we talked about those four internal humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, shuffling around inside your veins like a poorly managed fantasy football team? In the 14th century, keeping these fluids in a state of perfect equilibrium wasn't just a matter of feeling a bit under the weather, it was a matter of literal cosmic survival. And according to the leading medical minds of the Middle Ages, one of the absolute best ways to prevent your internal fluids from boiling over was a regular, healthy dose of human affection. Imagine walking into the dim, parchment-lined study of a university-trained medieval physician. The room smells of vinegar, crushed mustard seeds, and dried lavender. The doctor doesn't have a stethoscope or a blood pressure cuff. Instead, he stares intently at a flask of your urine held up to the window light and feels the rhythm of your pulse with a deeply serious expression. If you were suffering from insomnia, anxiety, or a sudden bout of irritability, his diagnosis wouldn't involve a prescription for modern wellness supplements or a recommendation to cut down on screen time. Instead, he might look at you solemnly and declare that you are suffering from a dangerous buildup of excess blood and vital spirits. In the medieval medical lexicon, the body was viewed as a pressurized steam engine, and intimacy was essentially the ultimate pressure relief valve. This brings us to a well-documented historical fact of the era. Medieval medicine was entirely obsessed with the concept of evacuation. To stay healthy, the body absolutely had to purge things that accumulated. If you had too much blood, they slapped a dozen slimy leeches on your arm, which was basically the medieval equivalent of putting an ice pack on a sprained ankle. But for the accumulation of romantic energies, the solution was far more pleasant. Doctors argued that when a person went too long without affection, their internal fluids would become stagnant, thick, and eventually turn toxic. For men, this stagnation was believed to chill the heart, while for women it could cause the womb to wander around the body out of sheer boredom, a condition they genuinely called a wandering womb. Therefore, regular intimacy was prescribed not as an indulgence, but as an essential common-sense hygienic chore, much like sweeping the hearth or clearing the gutters. Historians still debate exactly how many ordinary medieval peasants actually sought out a formal, university-trained physician for these intimate ailments, considering a doctor's fee could cost the equivalent of a whole flock of sheep. Most regular folks likely relied on the advice of the village cunning woman we mentioned earlier, or simply trusted their own ancestral instincts. Yet the trickle-down effect of this academic medical theory meant that ordinary people viewed their nightly connections with a sense of practical necessity. It wasn't just about romance. It was about keeping the gears of your physical vessel well-oiled and functioning. This worldview led to an incredibly strange, lesser-known medical diagnosis unique to the period, known as amor heros, or literal lovesickness. This wasn't just a poetic metaphor for a broken heart. It was treated as a severe, life-threatening clinical disease. If a young lord or a wealthy merchant's daughter became utterly obsessed with someone they couldn't have, medieval doctors believed the intense, unfulfilled desire would cause the animal spirits in the front of the brain to overheat. This heat would dry out the brain tissue, causing the person's eyes to sink into their skull, their skin to turn a ghostly yellow, and their pulse to skip wildly. If left untreated, the corrupted fluids would transform into a toxic wave of black bile, plunging the patient into total madness or literal death. The official medical cure for this terrifying condition? Physicians would legally prescribe that the patient be allowed to marry their crush immediately, or if that wasn't socially possible, they were ordered to visit a local herbal bathhouse to distract their overheated humors with warm water and pleasant music. It is amusing to think that a medieval doctor's note could literally force your parents to let you marry the person of your dreams, just to save your brain from evaporating. You shift under your heavy, woolen coverlet, listening to the gentle, rhythmic sighing of the wind outside the cottage. It is quite funny to contrast this medieval medical advice with our modern world. Today, if you go down an internet rabbit hole searching your symptoms, the algorithms almost always convince you that you have some rare, uncurable condition. In the Middle Ages, your local doctor would just look at your pale face, shake his head, and tell you that you desperately needed to spend a cozy evening holding hands with your partner to drain your excess vital spirits. It takes all the frantic pressure out of romance when you realize your ancestors viewed a romantic evening as a legitimate medical treatment, right alongside a bowl of hot onion pottage. You look down at your long linen sleeves, feeling the heavy, comforting warmth of the bed. There is a profound sense of relief in this old philosophy. It completely stripped away the modern anxiety of performance and replaced it with a gentle biological duty. You weren't trying to live up to an unrealistic standard set by romance novels or glossy magazines. You were simply two human beings helping each other balance their humors in a cold, unpredictable universe. Gradually, the strange theories of Galen, the talk of wandering wombs, and the images of serious doctors staring at flasks of fluids begin to melt into the quiet dark of the room. The air in the cottage is perfectly still now, carrying only the faint, comforting scent of the wood ash from the hearth. Your body feels heavy, completely relaxed, and perfectly balanced, just as those ancient medical texts promised. You close your eyes, letting your breath sync up with the slow, eternal pulse of the night, and allow yourself to sink deeper into the restorative, comforting embrace of the medieval dark. As you let the ancient medical theories of balanced humors fade into the shadows of your raftered ceiling, your mind slips from the practical realities of the peasant cottage into a completely different kind of medieval fantasy. If you were a wealthy young lord or a noble lady living in a towering stone castle during the High Middle Ages, your romantic life wouldn't be defined by crowded straw mattresses or practical medical prescriptions. Instead, your world would be governed by the elaborate, agonizing, and intensely dramatic rules of courtly love. You pull your heavy blanket tighter around your shoulders, imagining the cold draft sweeping through a grand stone hall where a lonely, traveling musician plucks the strings of a lute, singing a melody so slow and sorrowful it could easily lull a restless mind to sleep. Modern romantic comedies love to show people grandly declaring their love and living happily ever after. But in the aristocratic circles of the 12th and 13th centuries, true love was defined by one very specific rule. It had to be completely impossible. Courtly love, or fin amour as the traveling troubadours called it, was a highly formalized cultural trend that originated in the sunny courts of Aquitaine before spreading across Europe like a slow-moving literary fever. This wasn't a private emotion. It was an elaborate social game played by the elite. The core rule of the game was that a knight must dedicate his entire life, his poetry, and his military victories to an unattainable lady, usually the wife of his immediate feudal lord. Historians still debate whether these intense noble passions were ever meant to be physically consummated, or if they were purely a psychological sport designed to keep young, heavily armed men well behaved in court. However, the written rules of this trend were absolute, turning pining into a full-time aristocratic profession. To understand how this worked, you have to imagine a young knight lying awake in his chilly stone tower, completely paralyzed by a single glance from a duchess across a crowded banquet hall. Under the code of courtly love, he isn't allowed to simply walk up and ask her for a dance. Instead, he must enter a state of literal romantic torture. A famous handbook from the era, De Amore, written by Andreas Capellanus, listed over 30 strict rules for true lovers. According to these rules, a person in love must constantly turn pale at the sight of their beloved, their heart must skip a beat whenever she enters the room, and they must lose their appetite and suffer from severe insomnia out of sheer emotional distress. If you were getting a solid 8 hours of sleep every night, you were viewed as a terribly uncultured, unromantic person who completely lacked a noble soul. An unusual fact that highlights the bizarrely upside-down nature of this aristocratic trend is that marriage was officially considered the absolute death of true romance. The medieval nobility viewed marriage strictly as a cold, calculating business transaction used to secure borders, inherit castles, and trade thousands of sheep. Because marriage was a legal obligation, medieval writers argued that true affection could only exist outside of it, where love was given freely as a gift rather than demanded as a feudal duty. This meant that a courtly lover was expected to worship his lady from a safe, respectful distance, contenting himself with a single dropped handkerchief or a fleeting smile during a tournament. It was an intimacy based entirely on anticipation, built on a mountain of slow, yearning poetry and hushed sighs in the dark. You lie in the quiet dark of your own room, listening to the gentle hum of the night, thinking about the sheer exhausting drama of it all, Imagine having to spend your entire youth writing complex verses about how a lady's eyes are brighter than the morning sun, all while knowing that your only reward would be a polite nod from across a crowded courtyard. It turns out that the aristocracy managed to turn romance into something resembling a highly competitive, beautifully dressed endurance sport. It is amusing to contrast this high stakes medieval drama with our modern world, where we get anxious if someone takes more than 10 minutes to reply to a text message or leaves us on read. The medieval courtly lover was perfectly willing to wait 10 years just for permission to kiss the tip of a lady's silk glove. They didn't need instant gratification. They found a strange artistic peace in the slow, agonizing process of longing itself. Gradually, the imagery of glittering tournaments, weeping knights, and sorrowful lute songs begins to soften and blur in your mind. The dramatic rules of courtly love, the strict handbooks of romance, and the unattainable ladies of the castle towers melt away into the gentle velvet dark of the reality you are currently in. You don't have to win any tournaments tonight, and you don't have to write any poetry to prove the nobility of your soul. There is only the soft rustle of your mattress, the comforting weight of your blanket, and the absolute beautiful peace of a night that requires nothing from you but to close your eyes and let go. You sink deeper into the pillow, letting the grand illusions of the past dissolve and drift back down into the slow, unhurried rhythm of the medieval night. As the grand, sorrowful melodies of the courtly troubadours fade entirely into the dark corners of the ceiling, the reality of medieval power pulls you into a much more calculated world. If you were a child born into a powerful noble or royal dynasty in the Middle Ages, your romantic destiny wasn't decided by a beautifully written poem or a sudden glance across a crowded banquet hall. Instead, your future was mapped out on a giant piece of parchment by a room full of serious, middle-aged diplomats clutching cups of spiced wine. You shift slightly under your heavy coverlet, imagining what it would feel like to have your entire emotional life treated as a high-stakes chess match between two rival kingdoms. Modern society often views romance as a deeply personal journey of self-discovery, but for the medieval aristocracy, the concept of marrying for love was considered an act of utter madness, a dangerous, selfish whim that could literally tear an empire apart. Honyun, or marriage, was the ultimate weapon of diplomacy. It was a peaceful alternative to a bloody military campaign, a way to seal an alliance, transfer thousands of acres of land, and secure a line of succession without a single sword being drawn. Historians still debate exactly how much agency noble women actually possessed behind the scenes of these arrangements, as letters from the era show that some clever queens and duchesses managed to wield incredible political influence through their unions. Yet the official rule of the game was absolute. Your heart belonged to the crown, and your bed belonged to the state. This meant that the process of arrangement began almost before you could even walk. It was completely common for royal babies to be formally betrothed to one another while they were still trapped in their swaddling clothes. Diplomats would carry hand-painted miniature portraits of young princesses across the snow-capped Alps, allowing a foreign king to inspect his future daughter-in-law's facial structure before signing a treaty. By the time these children reached their early teens, the legal age of consent according to medieval canon law, they were expected to step into a massive glittering cathedral, look a complete stranger in the eye, and swear an oath that would bind their lives and their countries together forever. An unusual fact that highlights the heavy, almost surreal burden of these royal unions is the existence of the marriage by proxy ceremony. If a royal bride couldn't safely travel across a war-torn continent to reach her groom's palace in time for a political deadline, the wedding would take place anyway, thousands of miles apart. A proxy, usually a trusted high-ranking ambassador, would stand in for the absent groom at the altar. To legally seal the spiritual contract under the watchful eye of the church, an incredibly formal ritual would take place in the bridal chamber later that evening. The bride would lie down in her magnificent wedding bed, and the ambassador would climb in next to her. but to ensure absolute propriety, he would keep one fully booted leg outside the blankets, while a room full of royal witnesses stood around the bedpost clutching flickering candles to verify that no actual contact occurred. Imagine trying to navigate the absolute awkwardness of a legal wedding night with a fully armored diplomat resting his boot on your silk sheets. You lie in the quiet dark, listening to the soft rustle of the straw beneath your linen sheets, feeling a deep wave of sympathy for those gilded teenagers of the past. They lived in spectacular palaces, wore robes lined with soft ermine fur, and ate roasted peacock off silver plates. But they completely lacked the simple freedom to choose who they shared their lives with. Their private chambers weren't sanctuaries. They were fishbowls where every action was recorded by court scribes and evaluated by foreign spies. It is amusing to compare this intense, high-stakes dynastic pressure with our modern world, where we complain about the awkwardness of a blind date arranged by a well-meaning friend or the mild stress of navigating a family gathering. The medieval prince had to worry that if he didn't get along with his new spouse, it could trigger a 30-year border war that would bankrupt his entire treasury. It gives you a profound appreciation for the absolute luxury of an ordinary, quiet life. Gradually, the images of cold stone cathedrals, signed treaties, and royal brides staring at miniature portraits begin to soften and dissolve in your mind. The heavy politics of the medieval dynasties, the stress of the succession, and the eyes of the whispering courtiers fade away into the comforting, anonymous dark of the room. You don't have an empire to defend tonight, and your affection isn't a currency to buy the loyalty of a foreign duke. There is only the steady, peaceful rhythm of your own breathing, the soft warmth of the blanket wrapped around you, and the beautiful, uncomplicated freedom of a night that belongs entirely to you. You close your eyes, letting the heavy burdens of history lift away, and sink back down into the slow, unhurried peace of the medieval night. As you let the heavy burdens of royal dynasties lift from your mind, the cold night air of the 14th century gently reminds you of a much closer, much more intimate reality. Imagine you are back in your cozy timber cottage, and the long, restful hours of the midnight watch have finally passed. You want to turn to your partner, but there is a lingering thought in the back of your mind, one that modern people are completely obsessed with whenever they think about the past. What did people actually smell like back then? Before any embrace could happen in the deep dark of the medieval night, you had to navigate the fascinating, surprisingly deliberate world of personal cleanliness. Modern textbooks love to tell us that everyone in the Middle Ages was utterly filthy, that they never washed, and that they treated a basic bath like a terrifying curse that would instantly kill you. Honestly, looking at some of the muddy streets of a medieval town, you can see where that rumor started. But as you lie here on your clean linen sheets, smelling the faint scent of dried lavender and mint crushed into the floor, rushes, you realize the truth is much more nuanced. Medieval people actually cared deeply about cleanliness, especially before moments of closeness. They didn't have hot running water or synthetic body washes, but they had a deep sense of pride in their appearance, and they developed an entire culture of grooming that was as slow, rhythmic, and intentional as the rest of their lives. For the average peasant couple, preparing for a special evening didn't involve turning on a modern shower. Instead, it was a ritual of patience. You would drag a massive circular wooden tub into the center of the room, right in front of the hearth. Then you would spend the next hour boiling giant iron cauldrons of rainwater over the fire, pouring them into the tub until the water reached a comforting, steaming warmth. To make the experience pleasant, women would often throw handfuls of wild herbs into the water, rosemary to clear the mind, chamomile to soften the skin, and rose petals to leave a gentle, sweet fragrance that would linger long after the candles were blown out. Historians still debate exactly how often the poorest laborers could afford the luxury of a full bath, considering the immense amount of firewood required just to heat the water. Yet, town records show that even the humblest homes owned a wash basin, and people made a daily habit of scrubbing their faces, hands, and private areas with cold well water and a rough linen cloth before climbing into bed. An unusual fact that completely shatters our modern ideas about medieval hygiene is the massive popularity of the public bathhouses, known as stews. In major cities like London, Paris, and Frankfurt, these bathhouses were the absolute center of social and romantic life. You wouldn't just go there to get clean, you went there to relax, listen to musicians, play the lute, and enjoy a lavish meal. A wealthy merchant could rent a private wooden tub filled with perfumed water, and a servant would slide a large wooden board across the top of the tub, transforming it into a dinner table. You could sit neck deep in warm water while eating roasted capon, drinking spiced wine, and chatting with your partner in a room filled with thick, scented steam. It was the ultimate medieval date night, combining luxury, hygiene, and romance in a way that feels surprisingly modern. You lie back down on your mattress, watching the last faint glow of the embers reflect off the wash basin in the corner of the room. There is something incredibly peaceful about this ancient approach to grooming. They didn't have chemical deodorants or artificial perfumes to completely mask the natural scent of a human being. Instead, they relied on simple, honest things: the crisp smell of clean linen dried in the sun, the earthy tang of wood smoke from the hearth, and the subtle sweetness of a handful of dried lavender. It was a sensory world that was grounded, real, and entirely devoid of the frantic, hyper-sanitized pressures of the 21st century. It is amusing to contrast this slow, herbal ritual with our modern obsession with beauty products. Today, we scroll through social media, looking at multi-step skincare routines, spending fortunes on lotions and potions designed to make us smell like tropical fruits or exotic woods. The medieval peasants simply washed their face with rainwater, tied a clean linen cap over their hair, and trusted that nature had done a perfectly fine job. They didn't worry about whether they were perfectly flawless. They just wanted to be warm, clean, and comfortable in the arms of the person they loved. Gradually, the steam from the imaginary wooden tubs and the scent of the rose-infused water begin to fade into the cool, quiet dark of the room. The air inside the cottage settles, carrying only the deep, comforting stillness of the midnight hours. You don't have to boil any water tonight, and you don't have to worry about the modern world's endless standards of perfection. There is only the soft scratch of the linen shirt against your skin, the steady, warm presence of your partner beside you, and the absolute, beautiful simplicity of a night that asks nothing more of you than to breathe in the quiet and let yourself rest. You close your eyes, letting the clean, heavy blankets pull you down, and sink back into the slow, unhurried peace of the medieval night. The cool, deep stillness of the 14th century night cradles your small cottage, but as you shift beneath the heavy wool blankets, you are reminded that the quiet walls of your bedroom are not entirely soundproof against the eyes and ears of your local community. In the medieval world, a relationship wasn't just a private contract between two consenting individuals. It was a matter of intense public interest. If you and your partner were having an argument, or if one of you was failing to uphold the unspoken social and marital expectations of the village, you wouldn't just deal with a quiet, cold shoulder. You might find your entire love life dragged out into the open air of a formal medieval court, or worse, subjected to a loud, chaotic neighborhood ritual. Modern society values privacy above almost everything else, but the medieval village functioned like a single, massive, hyper-observant organism. Everyone knew exactly how many cows you owned, what you ate for supper, and precisely how well you got along with your spouse. The legal framework of the era, governed by church-run canonical courts, viewed a harmonious household as the bedrock of a stable society. If a marriage was failing significantly, local church wardens, who essentially acted as a holy neighborhood watch, would actively stick their noses into your business. Historians still debate how much the average peasant resented this constant surveillance, as records show that many ordinary folks actually use these local courts to resolve bitter domestic disputes or protect themselves from unfair treatment. Yet, the reality remained that the boundary between the community and the bedroom was as thin as a single sheet of parchment. This lack of privacy led to some of the most bizarre and highly specific legal battles in human history. If a married couple was experiencing a deep, unresolved rift, they couldn't just apply for a modern, no-fault divorce. They had to present their case before a judge in a formal matrimonial court. If a wife claimed that her husband was entirely neglecting his marital duties, which the church legally defined as a debt that both partners owed to each other, the court didn't just take her word for it. They would launch a full, highly technical investigation. To determine the truth of the matter, the court would appoint a panel of honest women from the village, usually a group of wise, straight talking older matrons. These women would take the husband into a private room, use various traditional herbal remedies and physical examinations to test his capabilities, and then march back into the courtroom to deliver their expert, unvarnished verdict to the judge. It is a wonder anyone managed to maintain their composure when their most intimate struggles were treated as a matter of official public record. An unusual fact that showcases the community's active, hands-on approach to relationship counseling is the famous folk ritual known as the charivari, or rough music. If a local couple was acting out in a way that violated the village's moral code, such as an older man marrying a very young woman just for her dowry, or a husband allowing himself to be violently mistreated by his spouse, the neighborhood wouldn't wait for a judge to step in. A crowd of villagers would gather outside the couple's window in the dead of night, clutching iron pots, metal frying pans, and wooden spoons. They would bang the pots together to create a deafening, discordant racket, shouting satirical rhymes and performing mocking skits right in the middle of the muddy street. This raucous performance would continue night after night until the embarrassed couple officially capitulated to the village's expectations or bought everyone a giant barrel of ale to secure some peace and quiet. You lie in the soft dark, listening to the gentle creaking of the timber beams above you, feeling a profound sense of gratitude for the thick, solid walls of your modern life. Imagine trying to relax on your straw mattress while knowing that if you and your partner had a minor disagreement about who was supposed to feed the pigs, 30 of your closest neighbors might show up at midnight with frying pans to serenade you. The medieval world was incredibly communal, which meant that while you were never truly isolated, you were also never truly alone with your thoughts. It is amusing to compare this intense public scrutiny with our modern world, where we hide behind screens, post perfectly curated photos of our lives on social media, and rarely even know the first names of the people living next door. The medieval peasant had no filters and no privacy, but they also had an undeniable clarity about where they stood in the world. There was no room for hidden secrets or lingering resentment. Everything was aired out, scrubbed clean, and put back together by the collective will of the village. Gradually, the imaginary clanging of the iron pots and the serious voices of the courtroom matrons begin to fade into the soft, velvet shadows of the room. The village outside is completely asleep now, the muddy streets silent, and the watchman's footsteps fading into the distance. You don't have to justify your relationship to a panel of experts tonight, and no one is waiting outside your window with a metal spoon. There is only the quiet, honest warmth of the linen sheets, the steady, grounding weight of your blanket, and the beautiful luxury of a night that requires absolutely nothing from you, but to breathe in the dark and let yourself drift away. You close your eyes, letting the watchful eyes of the community vanish into the shadows and sink back down into the slow, unhurried peace of the medieval night. The quiet of the medieval night deepens, wrapping your timber cottage in a safe, warm cocoon of silence. But as you lie there next to your partner, watching the final pale embers of the hearth turn to gray dust, your mind naturally wanders to another practical reality of intimacy in the 14th century. In a world governed by the strict calendar of the church, where every extra child meant another mouth to feed from a finite harvest of rye and barley, family planning wasn't just a modern lifestyle choice. It was a matter of sheer economic survival. And because modern scientific methods didn't exist, people had to rely on a fascinating, shadowy world of medieval contraception, blending herbal wisdom with absolute blind superstition. Modern medicine gives us precise clinical options, but the medieval approach to preventing a pregnancy was a wild journey through ancient folklore and natural philosophy. The church, of course, officially banned any attempt to interfere with nature, viewing it as a severe sin that disrupted the divine purpose of marriage. Yet historians still debate how effectively these religious bans were enforced, because the private letters of medieval women and the surviving handbooks of local midwives are absolutely overflowing with secret remedies. Women passed these whispered recipes down through generations, creating an underground network of reproductive knowledge that operated completely out of sight of the local parish priest. Some of these ancient methods actually possessed a surprising amount of genuine, accidental scientific validity. Midwives frequently recommended that women brew special teas using wild herbs like pennyroyal, Queen Anne's lace, or rutabaga seeds. Modern pharmacological studies have revealed that many of these specific plants contain natural compounds that can actively affect hormone levels or prevent implantation, proving that medieval women weren't entirely guessing in the dark. They observed the patterns of nature, tested the plants growing in the local meadows, and developed a practical herbal pharmacy to protect their bodies and their families' futures. However, because this was an era before laboratories, these genuine herbal remedies were often mixed with bizarre magical beliefs that sound completely surreal to us today. An unusual fact that highlights the strange, desperate superstitions of the time is the widespread belief in the protective power of the animal kingdom. A very popular folk remedy required a woman to hunt down a wild weasel, carefully remove its ears, and sew them into a tiny linen pouch. She would then wear this pouch as an amulet wrapped tightly around her thigh or hung from her neck during moments of closeness, fully believing the magical essence of the animal would act as an impenetrable spiritual shield. Other manuals solemnly suggested tying the tooth of a live frog to your arm or taking a walk backwards under a willow tree at midnight while reciting a secret prayer. It turns out that when people are desperate to control their own destiny, they will trust just about anything, from a poisonous sprig of mint to the ears of a small woodland creature. You shift against your rustling straw mattress, pulling the heavy wool blanket up to your chin, imagining the immense psychological burden medieval women carried. Every single intimate encounter was a high-stakes gamble with fate. If an unwanted pregnancy occurred, you couldn't look up medical options or visit a clean clinic. You had to rely on the quiet discretion of a neighbor, a bundle of dried roots hidden beneath the floorboards, and the hope that your internal humors would remain balanced enough to keep you alive. It created an underlying current of anxiety that modern humans, with our temperature-regulated bedrooms and easily accessible pharmacies, rarely have to contemplate. It is amusing to contrast these wild historical superstitions with our modern obsession with health tracking, fertility apps, and wearable tech that monitors our body temperature down to the exact microdegree. The medieval peasant didn't have an app to log her cycles. She just looked out the window at the phases of the moon, stuffed a handful of dried rue under her pillow, and hoped for the best. They didn't have the luxury of certainty, but they had an undeniable, deeply rooted connection to the physical world around them, trusting the earth to provide answers, even when the answers were cloaked in magic. Gradually, the strange images of midnight willow trees, herbal teas, and weasel amulets begin to dissolve into the peaceful velvet dark of the room. The air in the cottage is completely cool now, carrying only the gentle, grounding scent of clean linen and cold wood ash. You don't have to gamble with fate tonight, and you don't need any magical charms to protect your future. There is only the soft, steady rhythm of your partner's breathing beside you, the comforting weight of the blankets pressing down, and the absolute, beautiful security of a modern reality that allows you to simply close your eyes and rest. You let your thoughts drift away into the shadows, sinking deeper into the pillow, and surrender to the slow, unhurried peace of the medieval night. The deep, velvety dark of the medieval night holds the cottage in a quiet embrace, but as you listen to the rhythmic breathing of your household, your mind slips out through the wooden shutters, wandering down the narrow, unlit paths of the medieval town. So far, we've imagined intimacy within the heavy wool curtains of a marital bed, under the watchful eye of a local priest. But what about the people who lived completely outside of that traditional structure? Um, in the 14th century, a massive portion of the population didn't fit into the neat boxes of husband and wife. For a single woman trying to navigate this brutal, deeply patriarchal world, The path of intimacy and survival looked entirely different, split between the absolute silent serenity of the convent and the brightly lit, heavily regulated streets of the entertainment districts. Modern history often paints a bleak picture of medieval women as entirely powerless, but the reality was far more complex and surprisingly organized. If a woman chose to reject the traditional path of an arranged marriage, with all its risks of childbirth and domestic labor, she had a remarkably powerful alternative. She could take the veil and enter a nunnery. In the quiet, stone cloisters of a medieval convent, single women found a level of intellectual freedom, safety, and peace that was completely unavailable anywhere else. They learned to read, write, paint, and manage vast agricultural estates. Historians still debate exactly how strictly the vow of celibacy was maintained behind those high stone walls, as secret letters and court records occasionally reveal passionate romances between nuns and traveling monks. Yet, for many single women, the convent wasn't a prison. It was a sanctuary, a place where their minds and souls belonged entirely to themselves, free from the physical demands of medieval men. But for the single women who didn't have the dowry or the religious calling to enter a convent, survival often meant entering a very different, highly visible institution, the state-regulated legal brothel, known in England as the stews. If you think the medieval authorities tried to completely wipe out the oldest profession in the world, you are in for a massive surprise. The medieval church and secular kings actually viewed these districts as an absolute common sense necessity. The great theological thinker Thomas Aquinas famously argued that trying to ban these houses would be like removing the sewage system from a magnificent palace. Without it, the entire palace would become corrupted and filthy. Therefore, rather than outlawing the trade, medieval cities chose to own, tax, and heavily police it to keep the peace. An unusual fact that highlights the dizzyingly corporate and regulated nature of this trade is that the most famous legal brothels in London were actually owned and managed by the Bishop of Winchester himself. Located in the Southwark district just across the River Thames, these houses operated under a strict code of laws written down by the church authorities. The rules were designed with a level of bureaucratic precision that feels completely surreal. Working women were legally protected from being forced to work on holy days or during Lent. They were guaranteed the right to refuse service to anyone they disliked. And brothel keepers were strictly forbidden from charging exorbitant rents or keeping a woman against her will. The women working in these church-owned properties even earned the popular cheeky nickname of Winchester geese. It is a truly bizarre historical irony that a single woman in the Middle Ages could find her workplace safety guidelines authored by a high-ranking Catholic bishop. You lie in the quiet dark of your room, listening to the soft rustle of your straw mattress, reflecting on how differently our ancestors managed the messy realities of human nature. They didn't try to force an unrealistic, hyper-pure standard on an entire population. Instead, they built massive, practical structures to contain, regulate, and tax every aspect of human desire. Whether a woman was singing Latin hymns in a sunlit stone cloister or paying her weekly taxes to a bishop's collector in a noisy tavern, her life was shaped by an era that valued public order far more than private judgment. It is amusing to compare this highly organized communal approach with our modern debates around relationships, independence, and the gig economy. Today, we pride ourselves on our complete freedom and individual choices, yet we constantly struggle to build safe, supportive communities for people who choose to live outside the traditional norms. The medieval world was rigid, yes, but it was also incredibly honest about what it took for an independent person to survive in a cold universe. Gradually, the distant sounds of the London taverns, the chiming of the convent bells, and the images of the Winchester bishops fade away into the cool, silent dark of the room. The air in your cottage settles into a deep, comforting stillness, carrying only the faint scent of wood smoke and clean linen. You don't have to navigate the complex survival strategies of the past tonight, and your worth isn't being measured by a tax collector or a mother superior. There is only the simple, uncomplicated peace of your own bed, the heavy blanket keeping the night chill at bay, and the beautiful freedom to simply let your thoughts dissolve into the shadows. You close your eyes, letting the long history of human survival drift out of your mind and sink deeper into the slow, unhurried rhythm of the medieval night. The deep, velvety shadows of the medieval night remain perfectly still, holding your small timber cottage in a quiet, protective bubble. But as you lie there, feeling the heavy, comforting warmth of the linen sheets against your skin, your mind gently drifts back to the hours before the village watchman locked the heavy wooden gates for the evening. How did people actually get to this point of nightly closeness in a world where every single move you made was watched by a neighbor, a family member, or a parish priest? In the 14th century, before you could ever share a rustling straw mattress or negotiate the complex calendar of the church, you had to master the highly sophisticated, incredibly subtle art of medieval flirting, a silent language of secret codes, hidden signals, and delicate gestures designed to bypass the constant surveillance of society. Modern romance often relies on direct text messages, explicit dating profiles, and casual conversations in brightly lit coffee shops. But if you were a young person living in the Middle Ages, walking up to someone and bluntly declaring your attraction was considered a spectacular violation of manners that could instantly ruin your family's reputation. Instead, communities developed an intricate underground language of courtship that allowed people to express intense desire without ever uttering a single scandalous word. It was a romance built entirely on subtext, turning a simple walk through the village marketplace or an afternoon at a local festival into a high-stakes game of emotional chess. Historians still debate exactly how much the average working peasant participated in these elaborate courtship codes compared to the wealthy nobility, but local court records and folklore suggest that ordinary folks were just as clever at using everyday objects to send secret signals to their crushes. Let's look at how this silent language functioned in daily life. Imagine you are standing in a crowded, noisy parish church during Sunday Mass. The air is thick with the scent of frankincense and beeswax, and the priest is chanting in Latin. You catch the eye of a weaver's daughter across the stone aisle. Under the watchful eyes of her parents, she cannot speak to you. Instead, she gently adjusts the folds of her linen wimple or lets her handkerchief slide slowly from her fingers onto the stone floor. In the medieval code of courtship, every movement had a precise definition. A handkerchief dropped to the right meant patience, I see you, while a slight tilt of her head toward the door was a silent invitation to walk past her family's garden wall after dusk. An unusual fact that highlights the beautifully creative and slightly cheeky nature of this hidden language is the widespread use of the chaplet or floral crown as a romantic text message. During spring planting festivals and harvest fairs, young women would spend hours weaving elaborate wreaths using specific flowers gathered from the local meadows. Each flower carried a precise, universally understood meaning under the era's folklore. If a woman wore a crown of red roses, it was a bold public declaration of romantic availability. If she added sprigs of wild thyme, it signaled that she valued courage in a partner. But the ultimate game of medieval flirting occurred when a young man walked past. If the woman subtly untwined a single blossom from her hair and casually let it drop into his path, it was the definitive 14th century equivalent of swiping right. It was a society that managed to turn ordinary meadow weeds into a highly effective tool for mutual connection. You lie in the soft dark, listening to the gentle creaking of the cottage timber beams, imagining the sheer electric thrill of those small stolen moments. Because physical closeness was so heavily restricted, a single dropped flower or a fleeting glance across a crowded church aisle carried more emotional weight than a dozen modern text messages. It forced people to move slowly, to observe each other with intense focus, and to find deep poetic meaning in the smallest details of daily life. Romance wasn't a casual, disposable thing. It was a rare, hard-won treasure that required patience, wit, and absolute discretion to achieve. It is amusing to compare this slow, highly observant courtship with our modern world of instant gratification. Today, we double tap a photo on a screen, send a quick emoji, and move on with our day without ever looking someone in the eye. The medieval peasant had to wait weeks just for a single silent nod across a muddy village square, finding a strange, beautiful peace in the slow, agonizing process of anticipation itself. They didn't need a digital algorithm to find attraction. They trusted their own eyes and the subtle rhythms of the natural world to guide their hearts. Gradually, the images of sunlit spring meadows, dropped handkerchiefs, and secret floral crowns begin to soften and blur in your mind. The silent codes of the medieval marketplace, the stolen glances in the incense-filled churches, and the watchful eyes of the village elders melt away into the gentle, anonymous dark of the reality you are currently in. You don't have to decode any secret signals tonight, and you don't have to hide your thoughts from anyone. There is only the soft rustle of your mattress, the steady, grounding warmth of your partner's hand resting near yours, and the absolute, beautiful simplicity of a night that asks nothing more of you than to let go of the day and allow yourself to dream. You sink deeper into the pillow, letting the playful spirits of the past dissolve and drift back down into the slow, unhurried peace of the medieval night. The long, mysterious hours of the medieval watch have run their course, and the deep, ink-black velvet of the 14th century sky begins to soften into a pale, translucent indigo. You lie perfectly still on your rustling straw mattress, feeling the heavy wool blanket pressing down on your limbs with a comforting, familiar weight. The absolute silence of the midnight hours is slowly broken by the first scattered rhythmic calls of a distant village rooster, followed by the faint, metallic clinking of the watchman's keys down the muddy lane. In the medieval world, dawn isn't just a marker on a digital clock. It is a profound, physical shift, a boundary line where the secret, slow world of nighttime intimacy must instantly evaporate to make way for the relentless demands of daily survival. Modern mornings are often met with the frantic rush of morning news, checking notifications and rushing through a hot shower before a long commute. But here, as the first cold, gray light filters through the grease-soaked parchment of your small window pane, the transition back to reality is measured and collective. You watch the pale light illuminate the small wooden crucifix hanging above the headboard, and you realize that the unique sanctuary you and your partner shared under the cover of darkness is drawing to a close. Historians still debate whether the ordinary medieval peasant viewed the arrival of dawn with a sense of dread or simple acceptance, but surviving folk songs from the period, known as albus or dawn poems, are filled with the beautiful, melancholy laments of lovers who desperately wish the sun would stay below the horizon just a little bit longer. As the room grows brighter, the physical realities of the 14th century reassert themselves with gentle persistence. You shift your weight, hearing the straw crunch beneath the stiff linen of your long chemise, and look over at the cold hearth in the center of the room. Soon, you will have to rise, blow the cold ash away from the buried embers, and coax a new fire to life using dry oak, twigs, and flint. There are cows to be milked in the attached stable, rye bread to be baked in the communal village oven, and miles of heavy wool cloth to be woven before the sun sets once again. The magical interlude of the two-phase sleep, the whispered conversations of the second watch, the silent language of secret signals, and the careful balancing of your internal humors are all packed away, stored safely in the quiet chambers of your memory until the darkness returns. An unusual fact that underscores the absolute finality of the medieval dawn is the rigid cultural expectations surrounding morning productivity. In many European villages, sleeping past the first ringing of the church bells for prime, the early morning prayer service around 6 o'clock, wasn't just viewed as a sign of personal laziness. It was considered a minor spiritual, moral failure. Local community elders believed that the morning air was filled with a crisp, holy energy that would keep your humors perfectly balanced, provided you were up and working. If a couple stayed huddled beneath their blankets too long after the sun rose, neighbors would assume they were giving in to the dangerous temptation of sloth or overindulging in earthly pleasures. And therefore, the medieval dawn required an immediate stoic return to the community, forcing you to step out of your private linen cocoon and rejoin the shared public rhythm of the village. You pull the heavy coverlet up to your chin for one last precious moment, feeling the deep, residual warmth you and your partner generated throughout the long winter night. There is a beautiful, grounded honesty to this daily cycle. The medieval world was incredibly brutal, cold, and demanding, but it was also a world that honored the natural boundaries of the earth. When it was dark, you slept, you loved, and you rested without the nagging guilt of productivity hanging over your head. When it was light, you worked with your hands, entirely connected to the soil, the seasons, and the people around you. It was a lifestyle completely devoid of modern comfort, yet entirely rich in human presence. As the pale gray light slowly fills the corners of your modern room, the imagery of the medieval village begins to soften, blurring at the edges like a half-remembered dream. The cold stone hearths, the rustling straw mattresses, the strict calendars of the church, and the long linen nightcaps gently dissolve into the quiet dark of your own mind. The long journey through the history of human intimacy is over, and your thoughts are returning to the safe, peaceful sanctuary of your own bed. You can feel the smooth, clean texture of your modern sheets, the perfect temperature of the air around you, and the deep, soothing rhythm of your own breathing. The world outside your window is completely quiet, and there are no alarms, no duties, and no expectations waiting for you in this space. Your mind feels light, clear, and perfectly balanced, drifting effortlessly on a calm, dark sea of absolute serenity. The weight of the day has lifted entirely from your shoulders. You don't have to think about the past, and you don't have to plan for the future. There is only this bed, this blanket, and the beautiful, deep stillness of the current moment. Let your muscles relax, starting from your shoulders all the way down to your toes. Let the gentle hum of the room wrap around you like a protective shield against the rest of the world. Breathe in the quiet, breathe out the tension, and let yourself float away into the deep, restorative, and beautiful dark. Open quote, open quote, close quote, close quote.